340 pounds of hired muscle slammed both palms into Sylvester Stallone's chest, driving the actor backward into a blackjack table as chips scattered across the floor. Stallone didn't stumble, didn't flinch. He planted his feet, locked eyes with the giant towering over him, and what the cameras captured next made every security monitor in the building go silent. What happened in the next 90 seconds would become Las Vegas legend, a story whispered about in casino back rooms and VIP lounges for decades. What happened in the next 4 minutes would become Las Vegas legend, a story whispered about for decades in back rooms, VIP lounges, and security offices from the Strip to downtown Fremont Street. But let me take you there properly. Believe me, you need the full picture. It's a Saturday night, somewhere around 11, and the casino floor of one of the biggest resorts on the Las Vegas Strip is running at full capacity. Thousands of people packed shoulder to shoulder, slot machines screaming, cocktail waitresses weaving through the crowd carrying trays above their heads. Stallone had come to Vegas for a private event, a charity boxing exhibition tied to a film promotion, and afterward he drifted down to the main floor with a small group. No entourage of 15 guys, no roped-off section, just Stallone, 2 friends, and one personal security guy named Mitch, a former Marine who stood about 6'1" and carried himself the way a man does when he's been in real trouble and doesn't need to advertise it. Now here's where the 340-pound problem enters the story. His name was Gerald Briggs, and the man was enormous. Not fat enormous, thick enormous, 6'4", barrel chest, neck wider than most people's thighs, hands that could palm a basketball, the way you'd palm a tennis ball. Briggs worked casino security, had been on staff for nearly 3 years, and carried a reputation for being aggressive. Not tough, aggressive. There's a difference. Tough guys stay calm. Aggressive guys look for a reason. Briggs was working the floor that night, posted near the high roller section, and when Stallone's small group moved through that area, something happened that multiple witnesses later confirmed. A young woman, maybe 23 or 24, recognized Stallone and rushed toward him excited, phone out, asking for a photo. Stallone stopped. He actually stopped mid-stride, turned to her, and put his arm around her shoulder for the picture. No hesitation. That's who the guy was in public. Accessible, friendly. He took the photo, said something that made the girl laugh, and started to turn back to his group. That's when Briggs stepped in. Get this, Briggs didn't approach the girl. He approached Stallone, put his massive left hand on Stallone's chest, fingers spread wide, and pushed. Not a gentle redirect, a push, the kind of shove that moves a grown man backward against his will. Stallone stumbled. His lower back hit the edge of the blackjack table. Chips flew off the felt. A dealer flinched so hard she knocked her own card shoe sideways. And Briggs, still closing the distance, pointed one thick finger directly into Stallone's face and said, "You're causing a disruption. Move along now." Stallone straightened up, slowly. He didn't yell, he didn't swing. What he did was plant both feet on the carpet, square his shoulders, and look Gerald Briggs directly in the eyes with a stare that had about 40 years of fight training behind it. His jaw tightened, his chin dropped slightly, his weight shifted to the balls of his feet. If you know anything about boxing, you know exactly what that posture means. He was ready. "You just put your hands on me," Stallone said. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered in that unmistakable voice, low and sandpaper rough. Briggs didn't step back. He should have. Any intelligent human being in that moment, seeing what was building behind Stallone's eyes, would have created some distance and reconsidered the entire approach. But Briggs was 6'4", 340 pounds, wearing a security badge and standing in his own casino. In his mind, he owned this floor, so instead of backing off, he stepped closer, close enough that their chests were almost touching. He looked down at Stallone and said, "I told you to move. I don't care who you are. Move." Now I need to tell you something about Stallone that matters here, because it's going to change everything that happens next. People look at this man and they think actor. They think Rocky. They think movie punches and choreographed fights. Here's what nobody tells you. Sylvester Stallone had been a serious, trained boxer for decades. Not movie boxing, real boxing. He trained with real fighters. He sparred with professionals. When he was preparing for the Rocky films, he didn't just learn how to look good on camera. He took actual punishment. He broke ribs. He took shots to the face. He was hospitalized after a sparring session with Dolph Lundgren during the filming of Rocky IV because Lundgren hit him so hard in the chest it caused his heart to swell, and they had to rush him to intensive care. This was a man who had been hit by one of the hardest punchers to ever walk into a gym, survived it, and got back on set 3 days later. Stallone wasn't pretending to be a fighter. He was a fighter who happened to also be an actor. So when a 340-pound casino security guard shoved him into a blackjack table and got in his face, Stallone wasn't scared. He was calculating. Mitch, Stallone's personal security, was already moving. He cut through 2 bystanders, his right hand up, positioning himself to Briggs's left flank, but Stallone held up one hand without looking away from Briggs, just one hand, palm out, at waist level. "Stop, I got this." Mitch froze. He didn't like it. You could see it in the way his jaw clenched and his weight kept leaning forward, but he stopped. "I swear this happened exactly this way because 4 separate cameras caught it from 4 separate angles, and at least a dozen people later gave consistent accounts." Stallone took 1 step forward, not backward, forward, into the space Briggs was trying to dominate. And when he moved, the shift in the dynamic was visible. Briggs's chin lifted 1/2 an inch. His weight rocked back onto his heels. It was involuntary. When a man steps toward you instead of away, something primal fires in your brain, something ancient. And for the first time, Gerald Briggs looked uncertain. "You pushed me," Stallone said, still in that low register, "in front of all these people, for taking a photo with a fan." Briggs's eyes darted left, then right. He was realizing something. He was realizing that people were watching, not just watching, recording. Phones were up. The casino floor had shifted its attention entirely. The slot machines were still screaming, but nobody was listening to them. Every set of eyes in a 50-foot radius was locked on this confrontation. "Sir, I'm security," Briggs said, and for the first time his voice carried a defensive edge. "I'm doing my job." Stallone didn't blink. "Your job is to assault guests?" Briggs opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His hand, the one that had been pointing, dropped to his side. Stallone held the stare for 2 more seconds, then took another step forward. They were now chest to chest, 340 pounds versus a man who was 60 years old, 5'10", and maybe 190 soaking wet. And somehow, impossibly, the smaller man was the one applying pressure. Now here's where it gets really interesting. You ready? A floor manager appeared. Fast. Like he'd been launched from a cannon somewhere behind the pit. His name was Dennis something, thin guy, mid-40s, wearing a suit that was too shiny and an earpiece that he kept touching nervously. He inserted himself between Briggs and Stallone with both hands raised and immediately started talking in that fast, apologetic corporate tone that casino managers master the way surgeons master sutures. "Mr. Stallone, I am so sorry. This is absolutely unacceptable. Please let me assure you this does not represent our establishment. Please, sir, let me escort you to our VIP area. Anything you need, on the house, completely on the house." Stallone didn't move. Dennis was talking at him, but Stallone was still looking at Briggs, who was now standing slightly behind the manager, arms at his sides, face working through something complicated. Embarrassment, maybe, or anger that he was being undermined in front of the crowd. Hard to say. Both, probably. "I don't want VIP," Stallone said, finally shifting his gaze to Dennis. "I want an apology from him." He pointed at Briggs. "Right here, right now." The floor went dead, not quiet, dead. Even the slot machines seemed to hold their breath, though obviously they didn't, but in the memory of everyone who was there, that's how it felt. Dennis turned to Briggs, gave him a look that said everything. A look that said your career is hanging by a thread so thin it might already be broken. Briggs's massive chest expanded with a deep breath, his hands clenched at his sides, his shoulders rolled forward. For a moment, a genuine moment, it looked like he might do the opposite of apologize. It looked like he might escalate. His whole body was wound up, 340 pounds of coiled aggression and wounded pride, and the decision was right there on his face. But Stallone did something nobody expected. He stepped around Dennis, walked directly up to Briggs again, and this time, his face changed. The hardness didn't disappear, but something underneath it softened. Barely. Just enough. "Hey," Stallone said, and his voice dropped even lower, almost private. "I get it. Big crowd, things get chaotic, but you can't put your hands on people, man. That's a line." Cross my heart that happened. The most famous action star on the planet, the guy who just got shoved into a table, was offering this massive security guard a graceful exit, a bridge, a way to say sorry without being humiliated. Stallone was giving him a door. Briggs stood there. His chest was still heaving. His jaw muscles were working overtime. And then something cracked, not physically, emotionally. You could see it happen in real time. The aggression drained out of his posture. His shoulders dropped. His hands unclenched. He looked at Stallone, and for one raw, unguarded second, you could see the human being behind the 340-pound fortress. A guy who was probably having a bad night. A guy who'd probably been aggressive too many times and gotten away with it. A guy who was suddenly standing in front of a man who had every right to destroy him professionally, socially, and legally, and who was instead giving him a chance to make it right. Briggs looked down at the carpet, then back up. "I shouldn't have done that," he said. "I'm sorry, sir." And that should have been the end of it. That should have been the whole story. A confrontation, a tense standoff, a moment of grace and apology. Wrap it up, go home. But it wasn't the end, not even close. Because Gerald Briggs apologized, and then about 90 seconds later, he made the worst decision of his entire life. Let me tell you what happened in that minute and a half. Stallone accepted the apology. Nodded once, offered his hand. Briggs shook it, though his grip was weak and his eye contact was shaky. Dennis, the floor manager, was practically melting with relief, already on his earpiece calling someone, probably his supervisor, probably saying crisis averted. Stallone turned back to his group. Mitch fell in beside him. They started walking toward the bar area on the far side of the floor. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse. Phones went down. Conversations resumed. The casino started breathing again, but one of those phones didn't go down. A young guy, maybe mid-20s, had been recording the entire confrontation from about 15 feet away. And as Stallone walked past him, this kid held up his phone and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Yo, Sly, that big dude just punked you, bro. You gonna let that slide?" Rocky wouldn't let that slide. Stallone ignored him, kept walking, didn't even acknowledge the comment. Because Stallone was a grown man, and grown men don't take the bait from kids trying to create content. But Briggs heard it. Now pay attention here, because this is the hinge. This is the moment where the whole story tilts. Briggs heard that comment, heard, "That big dude just punked you." And somehow, in Briggs's mind, that phrase reframed the entire interaction. In his head, the apology he'd just given wasn't grace accepted. It was submission. It was weakness. He had backed down in front of hundreds of people, and now some kid with a phone was narrating it in real time as him getting punked. The apology went from the smartest thing he'd done all year to the most humiliating moment of his career. Just that fast. Just that easily. One comment from a nobody rewired his entire response, and Gerald Briggs started walking, not toward the kid, toward Stallone. Mitch saw it first. The Marine in him picked up the movement before anyone else. He turned, saw Briggs closing the gap with that particular walk that big men have when they've decided something violent, and Mitch put himself directly in the path. But Briggs was 340 pounds of momentum and fury, and he stiff-armed Mitch so hard the former Marine went sideways into a cocktail table, sending glasses crashing to the floor. The sound of breaking glass cut through the casino noise, and Stallone spun. He spun, and he saw Briggs coming at him with intent. Not security guard intent. Not doing my job intent. Personal intent. Fury. And in that moment, Stallone's body did what decades of training had hardwired it to do. He didn't think. He reacted. He dropped his center of gravity. His left foot slid back. His hands came up, not in the showy fists raised pose from the movies, but in a real boxing guard, tight, compact, elbows in, chin tucked behind his left shoulder, his right hand positioned at his cheekbone. His eyes locked on Briggs's chest, not his eyes, because your chest tells you where the attack is coming from, not your face. That's real fighter instinct. That's thousands of hours in a gym. Briggs reached for him. Threw a massive right hand, more of a clubbing overhand than a punch, the kind of wild shot that big guys throw when they're used to their size doing the work. It had bad intentions and zero technique. Trust me on this part because the overhead camera caught it in perfect clarity. Stallone slipped left. Not a dramatic movie-style dodge, a 6-inch movement of his head and torso, just enough to let Briggs's fist sail past his right ear. The momentum of the missed swing pulled Briggs forward, off balance, and Stallone did something that fight analysts would later break down frame by frame. He threw a short right hand to Briggs's body. Liver shot, compact, vicious, about 8 inches of travel, maximum. It wasn't a haymaker, it wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. And it landed exactly where it needed to land, right beneath the ribs on Briggs's left side, directly on the liver. If you've never seen what a liver shot does to a human being, let me paint it for you. It doesn't knock you out. It doesn't send you flying. What it does is shut your body down. It's an electrical failure. Your nervous system receives a signal so overwhelming that it simply quits. Your legs stop working. Your diaphragm seizes. You can't breathe. You can't stand. And the pain, the specific pain of a liver shot, is unlike anything else in fighting. It's a deep, nauseating, total body agony that makes big men crumple. And that's exactly what Gerald Briggs did. He crumpled, all 340 pounds folded inward, his knees buckled. He went down to the casino carpet in stages, first to his knees, then to his side, both hands clutching his midsection, his face twisted in a way that was almost impossible to look at. His mouth was open, but no sound was coming out. His body was trying to breathe and couldn't figure out how. Stallone stood over him for exactly 2 seconds. His guard was still up, his feet were still set, and then, slowly, his hands came down. He straightened up, rolled his right shoulder, once, and looked around the casino floor at the stunned faces staring back at him. The whole exchange, from Briggs's charge to Briggs on the ground, lasted less than 4 seconds. Let me say that again so it registers. Less than 4 seconds. A 340-pound man attacked a 60-year-old actor and was on the floor struggling to breathe in under 4 seconds. Mitch was back on his feet, bleeding from a small cut above his eyebrow where he'd hit the cocktail table. He moved to Stallone's side immediately, scanning the area, checking for additional threats. There were none. The only threat in the building was currently on the carpet in the fetal position, trying to remember how lungs worked. Dennis, the floor manager, was sprinting back across the floor, earpiece forgotten, face the color of old paper. 2 more security guards were coming from different directions, both of them looking at their colleague on the ground with expressions that mixed confusion and barely concealed horror. Here's the thing that gets me about this moment. I've watched the footage probably 40 times, and what strikes me isn't the punch, it's what happened after. Stallone looked down at Briggs. And the fury wasn't there. It had been there, briefly, in the instant he threw the shot. But now it was gone, replaced by something that looked a lot like sadness, or maybe disappointment. Stallone crouched down next to Briggs, and this is the part that kills me. He put one hand on Briggs's shoulder, gently, the same hand that had just dropped him. "Breathe through it," Stallone said. "In through your nose, slow, it'll pass." He was coaching the man through the recovery from the punch he'd just thrown. Think about that. A 60-year-old man who'd just been attacked, who'd defended himself perfectly, was now on his knees on a casino floor helping his attacker breathe. No cameras should have caught that moment, but one did. A security camera positioned above the nearest blackjack table had a direct angle, and somebody, a security room employee who was either brave or stupid, leaked the footage 3 weeks later. That clip alone got 11 million views in its first 48 hours. Briggs lay there for about 90 seconds, slowly getting his breathing back, slowly uncurling from the fetal position. When he finally rolled onto his back and looked up at Stallone, his eyes were wet, not from the pain anymore, from the totality of what had just happened. His career was over. He knew it. Everyone knew it. He'd assaulted a guest, a celebrity guest, on camera, after already apologizing for a previous assault, and he'd gotten dropped by a man who was supposed to be an easy target. "I messed up," Briggs said from the floor. His voice was wrecked. Stallone stood up, brushed off his knees, looked down at Gerald Briggs one last time and said the line that would end up on t-shirts, on memes, on quote pages across the entire internet. "Stay down, champ." 7 words. Under 15. No explanation after. He just turned and walked away. Now, if you're enjoying the story and you want more breakdowns of real confrontations where legends proved they were the real thing, hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications, because I've got stories coming that'll make this one look like a warm-up. Let me finish this out because the aftermath matters as much as the punch. Stallone walked to the bar. Mitch stayed close, still scanning, still bleeding from that cut. The 2 friends in Stallone's group, who had been frozen during the entire confrontation, finally caught up, both talking at once, both asking if he was okay. Stallone ordered a drink, whiskey, neat. He picked it up with his right hand, the same hand, and took a sip. His knuckles were red, not bruised, just flushed. The punch had been so clean, so precise, that he'd barely even marked his own hand. That's what proper technique does. That's the difference between a trained fighter and a guy who just happens to be big. Dennis, the floor manager, arrived at the bar within minutes, and this time he brought reinforcements. The resort's general manager, a woman named Patricia, showed up in a black suit with a face that suggested she'd been briefed on the disaster while running down a hallway. She apologized profusely, offered comped suites, comped dinners, comped everything. Stallone listened politely. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten lawsuits, at least not right there. He simply said, "That man needs to not be in a position to touch people anymore. That's all I want tonight." Patricia nodded so fast she probably gave herself a headache. Gerald Briggs was relieved of his duties that night, not suspended, terminated. He was escorted off the property by two of his former colleagues, still holding his left side, still breathing carefully, still processing what had happened to him. Here's what happened to the footage. The initial confrontation, the shove, the standoff, the first apology that was captured by multiple guests on their phones. Several clips went online within hours. They showed Stallone being pushed, standing his ground, getting the apology. Those clips got millions of views, but they told an incomplete story. They made it look like a tense situation that resolved peacefully. The second incident, the charge, the punch, the aftermath, was primarily caught on the casino's internal cameras. And casinos guard their surveillance footage the way dragons guard gold. Under normal circumstances, none of that would have ever seen the light of day. But casinos have employees, and employees have phones, and somebody recorded a screen playback of the security footage on their personal device. That leaked video hit the internet about 3 weeks after the incident, and it detonated. I'm talking international news. I'm talking frame-by-frame analysis on every boxing channel, every martial arts channel, every celebrity news outlet. I'm talking professional fighters watching the clip and commenting publicly about how clean that liver shot was. One former middleweight champion posted a reaction video where he watched the punch in slow motion, and his exact words were, "That's not a movie star throwing a punch. That's a fighter. That's a real, trained, educated fighter. The angle, the rotation, the placement, that's a guy who's been coached by people who know what they're doing. You couldn't fake that. You couldn't get lucky with that. That punch was earned in a gym over years." Mark my words, that analysis changed public perception of Stallone overnight. For decades, there had been a segment of the population that dismissed him, called him a fake tough guy, said he was all Hollywood, said the muscles were for show, said he couldn't actually fight. In 4 seconds on a casino floor, with one short right hand to a 340-pound man's liver, Stallone rewrote that narrative permanently. But here's the part of the story that almost nobody knows, the part that happened away from cameras, away from phones, away from the public eye. About 2 months after the incident, Gerald Briggs was in a bad place. No job. His name was all over the internet as the security guard who got knocked down by a 60-year-old actor. He couldn't get hired anywhere on the strip. He'd become a meme. His face was in thumbnail images with captions mocking his size, his toughness, his judgment. He was drinking. His marriage was stressed. He was, by his own later admission, at the lowest point of his life. And then he got a phone call from Stallone's people. Straight up, this is the part that makes the whole story something more than just a viral fight clip. Stallone's team reached out to Briggs through an intermediary, a mutual contact in the Las Vegas security industry, and asked if Briggs would be willing to have a private conversation. No cameras, no press, no lawyers, just a conversation. Briggs said yes, because what else was he going to say? His world had already collapsed. He had nothing left to lose. They met in a private room at a different hotel, one where Stallone was staying during another visit to Vegas. Just the two of them, and Mitch standing outside the door. What happened in that room was later shared by Briggs himself in a long social media post he wrote about 8 months after the incident, a post that got almost as much attention as the original fight footage. According to Briggs, Stallone walked in, shook his hand, and sat down across from him. For the first few minutes, they just talked. Normal stuff. Where Briggs grew up, how he got into security work, what his family situation was. Stallone asked questions and listened to the answers, and Briggs said it was the strangest experience of his life because this man had every reason to hate him and instead was treating him with genuine interest. Then Stallone got to the point. He told Briggs that he knew what it was like to be angry. He told him that for a long time in his own life, before the acting career took off, he'd carried a chip on his shoulder so massive it affected every relationship, every interaction, every opportunity. He told Briggs that size and strength were gifts, but that using them to intimidate people was a waste. Not immoral, Stallone wasn't preaching at him. "A waste. You're wasting what you've been given," he said. And he told him that the night in the casino when Briggs apologized the first time, that was the strongest version of himself. Not the charge, not the attack, the apology. Now listen to me because this next part matters. Stallone offered to pay for anger management counseling, out of his own pocket. He also made a call to a security firm in Henderson, a suburb of Vegas, and personally vouched for Briggs to get a new position, not on the Strip, not in a casino. A corporate security gig at a tech company where the biggest threat was somebody tailgating through a badge access door. Briggs took the offer, he started counseling, he took the new job. And in his social media post, 8 months after the worst night of his life, he wrote something that I think about constantly. He wrote, "The man hit me so hard I couldn't breathe. Then he taught me how to breathe again. That's not something I can explain. That's something I'll carry forever." That post got shared over 200,000 times. People who had mocked Briggs started reaching out with support. People who had celebrated the punch started seeing the whole picture. And Stallone never commented on it publicly, never acknowledged the meeting, never used it for press or promotion. His team, when asked, said simply, "Mr. Stallone considers the matter private and resolved." That's the full story. That's what the cameras caught and what they didn't. A 340-pound casino bodyguard who thought his badge and his size made him untouchable. A 60-year-old movie star who turned out to be exactly the fighter his movies always said he was. A liver shot heard around the internet. And then, months later, a private act of kindness that proved something about Stallone that no movie role ever could. He wasn't playing a character. He was the character. The toughness was real. The compassion was real. The ability to knock a man down and then help him back up, not for cameras, not for credit, but because he knew what it felt like to be on the ground. That was the most Stallone thing about the entire story. And Gerald Briggs? Last anyone checked, he's still working corporate security in Henderson. Lost about 40 pounds. Stays out of trouble. Still holds the unofficial record for the largest human being ever dropped by a single body shot in a Las Vegas casino. A record nobody is in a rush to challenge. Stallone went back to the bar that night after the punch, finished his whiskey, tipped the bartender $200, and when one of his friends said, "Sly, that was insane," Stallone just shrugged and said, "I've taken harder shots from Dolph." Then he ordered another drink. And somewhere in a security office on the Strip, 4 camera feeds were quietly being copied onto a drive that would change the internet 3 weeks later, turning a Saturday night casino scuffle into one of the most analyzed, most shared, most debated real-life celebrity confrontations in the history of the city that's seen everything. Vegas doesn't forget. Vegas barely even blinks. But that night, for 4 seconds, Vegas held its breath. And the legend it exhaled has been traveling ever since.